He told her she was hysterical, that her pregnancy hormones were making her irrational. As Thea clutched her baby bump, listening to her husband, Sophia, list her emotional failings, she never imagined his final words to her that night would be, "Get out." He kicked her out, pregnant and sobbing, into the cold, unforgiving night. But what Sophia didn't know was that while he was sleeping soundly in their marital bed, Thea wasn't just crying. She was coding. She was building. And by the time the sun rose, a single headline would shatter his entire world. Forbes announces groundbreaking AI startup. The founder, Thea. The polished oak door clicked shut with a deafening finality, the sound echoing the shattering of Thea's world. Outside the San Francisco night air, usually a comforting, familiar embrace, felt sharp and hostile, each gust of wind a biting reminder of Sophia's cold, dismissive words. "You're being hysterical, Thea." He had sneered, his voice a venomous whisper that had coiled around her heart, squeezing it tight. "It's the hormones. They're making you irrational." She stood on the top step of their meticulously restored Victorian home, a place she had poured her heart and soul into, a place she had believed was their forever home. Her hand instinctively went to her burgeoning belly, a protective gesture over the tiny life that was a part of both of them, a life that Sophia now seemed to resent as much as he resented her tears. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. He had been the one to push for a baby, eager to cement their status as the perfect power couple. He the rising star at a prestigious venture capital firm, and she the brilliant but conveniently unemployed software engineer, the perfect supporting actress in the grand play of his life. The fight had started, as most of them did lately, over something trivial, a misplaced set of keys, but it had quickly escalated a spark in a tinderbox of unspoken resentments and simmering frustrations. Sophia, impeccably dressed in a bespoke suit even at 9 in the evening, had paced the living room like a caged panther. His every movement a study in controlled aggression. He had accused her of being careless, of being forgetful, of being a mess. But what he was really saying, what lay beneath the surface of his carefully chosen words, was that she was no longer the woman he had married. She was no longer the effortlessly chic, always composed and endlessly supportive partner who had been his greatest asset. She was pregnant. She was emotional. She was an inconvenience. "I can't deal with this, Thea," he had said, his voice laced with a weary exasperation that cut her deeper than any shout could have. "I have a multi-million-dollar deal on the line, and I come home to this." To tears and drummer over a set of keys. "They're your keys, Sophia," she had whispered, her voice trembling. "And I'm not being dramatic. I'm just tired. And I'm scared. Things are changing so fast." He had laughed then, a short, humorless sound that had made the fine hairs on her arms stand on end. "Scared, you're scared. Try having the weight of the world on your shoulders, Thea. Try being responsible for something more than just gestating." The word had hung in the air between them, ugly and dehumanizing. It was the moment she had realized that he didn't see her as a partner anymore. He saw her as a vessel, a means to an end. And now she was a malfunctioning one. "Get out," he had said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register. "I need some space. I need to think." "Sophia, please," she had begged, tears streaming down her face. "It's late. Where will I go?" "I don't know, Thea," he had replied, turning his back on her, a gesture of complete and utter dismissal. "Call your sister. Call a friend." Just go." And so she had. She had grabbed her purse and her laptop, the two items that felt most like her own, and had walked out of the life she had so carefully built. Her sister Chloe lived in Portland, a 6-hour drive away. Too far for tonight. Her friends, they were his friends too. Couples they socialized with people who saw them as the golden couple. To call them now would be to admit that the facade had crumbled, that their perfect life was a lie. She sank down onto the cold, unforgiving steps of her own home, a pariah on her own doorstep. The city lights twinkled below a sea of indifferent stars. She felt a profound and terrifying sense of aloneness, a feeling she hadn't experienced since she was a lonely, awkward teenager who had found solace in the logical, predictable world of code. Code. The thought was a lifeline in the swirling vortex of her despair. For years, her brilliance in software engineering had been a source of pride, a defining feature of her identity. She had been a rising star in her own right before she had met Sophia with a promising career at a top tech firm. But then he had come along with his dazzling smile and his grand ambitions, and he had convinced her that his dreams were big enough for the both of them. He had encouraged her to quit her job, to focus on building their life together. A life that she now realized had been built entirely on his terms. A wave of nausea washed over her, a familiar companion in her pregnancy. But this time, it was different. It was a visceral reaction to the truth she had been so blind to for so long. Sophia had not just been unsupportive. He had been systematically dismantling her confidence, her independence, her very sense of self. He had isolated her, convincing her that his world was the only one that mattered, that her own ambitions were trivial in comparison. But as she sat there in the darkness, a flicker of defiance ignited within her. He had called her emotional irrational. He had reduced her to a collection of raging hormones. But he had forgotten who she was before she had become Mrs. Sophia Vance. He had forgotten the girl who had won national coding competitions, the woman who had seen the world not as a series of chaotic, unpredictable events, but as a system of problems waiting to be solved. And in that moment, a new kind of resolve hardened within her. He wanted to see what she was capable of. He thought she was just a gestating vessel. She would show him. She would show them all. With trembling fingers, she opened her laptop. The familiar glow of the screen was a comfort, a portal back to a world where she was in control, where logic and innovation reigned supreme. For months, an idea had been percolating in the back of her mind, a project she had tinkered with in her spare moments, a secret she had kept from Sophia because she knew he would dismiss it as another one of her hobbies. It was an AI-powered platform designed to help female entrepreneurs connect with investors, a tool to level the playing field in a world that was still so heavily skewed towards men. She had named it Athena's Ascent, a nod to the goddess of wisdom and warfare, a symbol of the strength and resilience she now felt surging through her veins. As the first lines of code appeared on the screen, a sense of calm washed over her. The familiar syntax, the logical flow, it was a language she understood, a world where she was fluent. The tears still fell, but now they were tears of rage, of determination, of a woman who was finally blessedly waking up. She worked through the night, fueled by a potent cocktail of heartbreak and adrenaline. The city slept unaware of the quiet revolution happening on a doorstep in Pacific Heights. The world was about to change, and it was all because a man had made the colossal mistake of underestimating the woman he had just kicked out into the cold. By sunrise, Thea wasn't just going to be a scorned wife. She was going to be a force to be reckoned with. And Sophia Vance was about to learn that hell hath no fury, like a woman with a laptop and a billion-dollar idea. The first blush of dawn painted the San Francisco sky in hues of soft pink and fiery orange, a stark contrast to the darkness that had enveloped Thea for what felt like an eternity. She was still on the steps of her former home, her laptop perched precariously on her knees, her body aching with a fatigue that went bone deep. But her mind was on fire. As the city began to stir, a new kind of energy pulsed through her. The anger was still there, a hot, molten core in the pit of her stomach. But it was now overlaid with a thrilling, terrifying sense of possibility. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive, truly herself. She had spent the night not just coding, but strategizing. She had refined the business plan for Athena's ascent, fleshed out the user interface, and even drafted a press release. It was audacious, it was insane, but it was also brilliant. She knew it in her gut, the same way she knew that the baby growing inside her was a girl. With a deep breath, she took the plunge. She uploaded the press release to a platform that distributed it to a curated list of tech journalists and news outlets. She knew it was a long shot, that it would probably get lost in the deluge of 1,000 other announcements. But she had to try. Then she did something even bolder. She remembered a contact from her old life, a journalist named Sarah Jenkins who worked for Forbes. They had met at a tech conference years ago, and Sarah had been impressed by a presentation Thea had given on the future of AI. They had exchanged cards, and on a whim, Thea had saved the number. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she composed the email. She kept it short, professional, and to the point. She introduced Athena's ascent, highlighted its unique value proposition, and attached the press release. She didn't mention her personal situation, didn't even hint at the drama unfolding in her life. She let the idea speak for itself. As she hit send, a wave of dizziness washed over her. She hadn't eaten, hadn't slept, and the emotional and physical toll of the last 12 hours was catching up with her. She knew she couldn't stay on these steps forever. She needed a safe place, a place to regroup, a place to figure out what came next. With a heavy heart, she booked a room at a boutique hotel downtown, a place where she could be anonymous, where she could lick her wounds in private. The walk to the hotel was a blur. The city was waking up, people rushing to work, to their lives, oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred in hers. Once in her hotel room, she collapsed onto the bed, the plush duvet, a welcome comfort after the cold, hard steps. She allowed herself a few moments of self-pity, a few moments to mourn the life she had lost. But then she forced herself to sit up. There was no time for wallowing. She had a new life to build, a new future to create. She ordered room service, a feast of everything she had been craving, and as she ate, she felt her strength returning. She opened her laptop again, this time to a different screen, her online banking portal. Her heart sank as she saw the balance. Sophia had been the primary breadwinner, and while she had her own savings, they were modest. Enough to last a few months, maybe, but not enough to launch a startup. Panic began to set in, a cold, creeping dread. What had she done? Had she just thrown away her last bit of security on a pipe dream? And then her phone buzzed. An email. The subject line made her breath catch in her throat. Forbes urgent inquiry. Athena's ascent. Her hands trembled as she opened it. It was from Sarah Jenkins. She had read the press release, and she was intrigued. She wanted to schedule a call, immediately. A hysterical laugh bubbled up from her chest, a mixture of disbelief and exhilaration. It was happening. It was actually happening. The call with Sarah was a whirlwind. Thea, running on pure adrenaline, pitched Athena's ascent with a passion and clarity that surprised even herself. She spoke of the systemic biases in the venture capital world, the untapped potential of female entrepreneurs, the power of AI to create a more equitable future. She didn't have to fake the passion. It was born of her own painful experience, her own recent and brutal awakening. Sarah was hooked. "This isn't just a startup, Thea," she had said, her voice buzzing with excitement. "This is a movement, and you're at the forefront of it." By the end of the call, Sarah had made a decision. She wasn't just going to write a small piece about Athena's ascent. She was going to feature it on the cover of Forbes' digital edition. Thea was speechless. It was a dream come true, a fantasy she had never even dared to entertain, and it was happening to her now in the midst of the darkest moment of her life. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Photo shoots, interviews, fact-checking. Thea, still in the same clothes she had been wearing when Sophia had kicked her out, found herself being treated like a VIP, a visionary, a star. The irony was almost too much to bear. And then it was done. The article was live. The headline in bold, stark letters screamed from the Forbes homepage. "He kicked his pregnant wife out for being too emotional." By sunrise, her startup was on Forbes. Thea stared at the screen, her heart pounding in her chest. Sarah had, with Thea's hesitant permission, included the human element, the dramatic backstory. It was a risk, but Sarah had insisted it was what would make the story resonate, what would make it go viral. And she was right. Within minutes, the story was everywhere. It was trending on Twitter. It was being shared on Facebook. It was being dissected on Reddit. The name Thea Vance was on everyone's lips. And then the emails started pouring in. From venture capitalists who had once ignored her. From female entrepreneurs who saw her as a hero. From women all over the world who had been made to feel small, to feel emotional, to feel like they weren't enough. Her phone rang a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated, then answered. "Thea, it's Chloe." Tears sprang to Thea's eyes at the sound of her sister's voice. "Chloe," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "How did you—" "It's everywhere, Leah." Chloe said, her voice a mixture of awe and concern. "Are you okay? Where are you?" I'm in a hotel," Thea said, a fresh wave of tears streaming down her face. "Chloe, I'm on my way," Chloe said, her voice firm, unwavering. "I'm getting on the next flight to San Francisco. Don't you worry about a thing. Your big sister is coming." As she hung up the phone, a sense of relief so profound it was almost painful washed over her. She wasn't alone. She had her sister. She had an army of women she had never even met cheering her on. And she had Athena's ascent. Her new life had just begun. And as she looked out the hotel window at the city that had once been her prison, she now saw it for what it was. A city of endless possibilities. A city where a woman who had been kicked to the curb could rise up and conquer the world. And as for Sophia, she hadn't heard from him yet. But she knew it was only a matter of time. And when he did call, she would be ready. The tables had turned. The power had shifted. And Thea Vance was just getting started. The silence from Sophia was more unnerving than any angry voicemail or furious text message could have been. In the whirlwind that had become her life, the absence of his reaction was a gaping void, a storm cloud on the horizon that promised a deluge. Chloe arrived like a force of nature, all righteous indignation and fierce protective love. She enveloped Thea in a hug that felt like coming home, her presence a solid grounding force in the chaos. "I can't believe he did that to you," Chloe fumed, pacing the hotel room like a caged tigress. "That man is a monster, a soulless, egomaniacal monster." Thea, for the first time in days, allowed herself to be taken care of. Chloe ordered food, drew her a bath, and listened as Thea recounted the entire sordid tale, her voice breaking at times, but her resolve never wavering. "He didn't just kick me out, Chloe," Thea said, her voice low and intense. "He tried to erase me. He made me believe that I was nothing without him." "Well, he was wrong," Chloe said, her eyes flashing, "and now the whole world knows it." The Forbes article had taken on a life of its own. It had been picked up by major news outlets, discussed on morning talk shows, and had sparked a global conversation about sexism in the tech industry. Thea was no longer just a woman who had been wronged. She was a symbol, a beacon of hope for women everywhere. The influx of investment offers was staggering. Venture capital firms that wouldn't have given her the time of day a week ago were now clamoring for a piece of Athena's ascent. The valuation of her fledgling company had skyrocketed into the stratosphere. She was, to put it mildly, the hottest ticket in town. With Chloe by her side, Thea began to navigate this new dizzying reality. They hired a lawyer, a powerhouse of a woman named Isabella Rossi, who specialized in high-stakes divorces and corporate law. Isabella, with her sharp wit and even sharper suits, was exactly the kind of ally Thea needed. "We're going to hit him where it hurts, Thea," Isabella had said, her eyes glinting with a predatory light. "His wallet and his reputation." And then finally the call came. It was a Sunday afternoon, a week after she had been kicked out. Thea was in a conference room with Chloe and Isabella, strategizing their next move, when her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. "It's him," she whispered, her blood turning to ice. Isabella nodded. "Put him on speaker." Thea took a deep breath and answered the call. "Hello, Thea." Sophia's voice was a low, controlled rumble, but she could hear the undercurrent of fury. "We need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about, Sophia," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Don't be ridiculous," he snapped. "You've created a media circus. You're trying to ruin me." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Ruin you? You're the one who threw his pregnant wife out on the street." "You were being emotional," he said, the familiar condescension creeping back into his voice. "I needed space. And I needed a husband," she retorted, her voice rising. "A partner, not a ruthless businessman who sees his wife as a liability." "This is not a conversation for the phone," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "I'm coming over to your hotel." "No, you're not." Isabella's voice cut in sharp and authoritative. "Mr. Vance, you will have no further contact with my client. Any and all communication will go through me. Is that understood?" There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Sophia was not used to being challenged, especially not by a woman. "Who is this?" he demanded. "Isabella Rossi," she replied coolly. "Thea's legal counsel, and I suggest you get yourself a good lawyer, Mr. Vance. You're going to need one." With that, she ended the call. The room was silent for a moment, and then Chloe let out a whoop of triumph. "That was brilliant!" Thea felt a surge of adrenaline. The fear that had been her constant companion for so long was finally beginning to recede, replaced by a steely determination. The next few weeks were a blur of legal battles and business negotiations. Sophia, as expected, came out swinging. His lawyers tried to paint Thea as an unstable, vindictive woman who was using her pregnancy to extort money from him. They even tried to claim that Athena's ascent was his idea, that she had stolen his intellectual property. But they were no match for Isabella Rossi. She systematically dismantled their arguments, presenting evidence of Sophia's emotional abuse, his controlling behavior, and his attempts to sabotage Thea's career. And then came the bombshell. During the discovery process, Isabella's team unearthed a series of emails between Sophia and the senior partners at his firm. In them, he openly discussed his wife problem, complaining about her pregnancy and her emotional instability. He had even gone so far as to suggest that he was considering cutting her loose once the baby was born. The emails were a smoking gun, undeniable proof of his callousness and his deceit. When they were leaked to the press, the public outcry was deafening. Sophia's firm, facing a PR nightmare, had no choice but to fire him. His career, the one he had prized above all else, was in tatters. The divorce settlement was swift and brutal. Thea got everything she wanted, the house a significant portion of his assets, and full ownership of Athena's ascent. It was a complete and utter victory. But for Thea, it wasn't about the money or the revenge. It was about justice. It was about taking back her power, her voice, her life. And as she signed the final divorce papers, a sense of closure washed over her. The chapter of her life with Sophia Vance was finally blessedly over. She was free. And she was about to embark on the greatest adventure of her life, not just as a CEO, but as a mother. Her baby, the tiny life that had been at the center of this storm, was due in a few short months. And Thea knew with a certainty that resonated in her very soul that she was going to give her daughter a life filled with love, strength, and endless possibilities. A life that she and she alone had created. With the divorce finalized and Sophia a ghost of her past, Thea should have felt nothing but triumph. Athena's ascent was a phenomenon. The initial seed funding had ballooned into a 9-figure valuation, and the platform was already making a tangible impact, connecting hundreds of female founders with the capital they needed to thrive. Thea was a media darling, a celebrated feminist icon, and a soon-to-be mother. From the outside, her life was a fairy tale. But a new insidious unease had begun to creep in, a subtle discord in the symphony of her success. It centered around Chloe. Her sister, her rock, her fiercest defender, had seamlessly transitioned into the role of CEO of Athena's ascent. It had seemed like a natural fit. Chloe was organized, ruthless in negotiation, and fiercely loyal. Thea, busy with product development and being the public face of the company, had been grateful to hand over the operational reins. The first crack appeared during a board meeting. They were discussing a potential acquisition, a smaller tech company that had developed a complementary algorithm. Thea was hesitant, concerned that the acquisition would dilute their core mission. "I think we should pass," Thea said, looking around the boardroom at the faces of her investors and advisors. "It doesn't feel right. It's not who we are." "Nonsense, Leah." Chloe's voice, sharp and confident, cut across the room. "From a business perspective, it's a no-brainer. It will increase our market share by 15% overnight." She presented a series of slides filled with data and projections that made a compelling, if cold, case for the acquisition. The board was swayed. Thea, feeling a strange sense of being outmaneuvered, reluctantly agreed. It was a small thing, a difference in business strategy, but it left a bitter taste in her mouth. She had built this company on intuition, on a feeling, and Chloe was reducing it to a set of numbers on a spreadsheet. The incidents began to accumulate, small but significant. Chloe would make executive decisions without consulting her. She would speak for the company in interviews, subtly reframing its origin story to emphasize her own role. She started dressing in power suits that mirrored Isabella Rossi's her demeanor, becoming more and more imperious. Thea tried to tell herself it was just stress, the pressure of running a multi-million-dollar company. She tried to talk to Chloe to reconnect with the sister she knew and loved, but their conversations were stilted and formal, filled with business jargon and talk of quarterly reports. The warmth, the easy intimacy they had once shared was gone. The true betrayal, when it came, was as swift and brutal as Sophia's initial act of cruelty. It happened during a routine check-in with her legal team. Isabella Rossi, her face grim, had requested an urgent in-person meeting. "Thea," Isabella began, her voice unusually gentle. "We were conducting a standard audit of the company's financials, and we found something irregular." She slid a folder across the polished mahogany table. Thea opened it, her hands trembling. Inside were copies of wire transfers, bank statements, and shell company registrations. The beneficiary of a series of large, unauthorized transfers from Athena's Ascent's accounts was a corporation she had never heard of. "I don't understand," Thea whispered, her blood running cold. "What is this? That corporation," Isabella said, her voice tight with anger, "is owned by your sister." The words didn't compute. Chloe. Her. Chloe. It was impossible. A mistake. A misunderstanding. But the evidence was undeniable, a meticulous paper trail of deceit. Chloe had been systematically embezzling money from the company, funneling millions into a secret account. And then came the final devastating blow. Isabella produced another document, a signed agreement. It was a deal memo outlining the terms of a hostile takeover of Athena's Ascent. Chloe had been colluding with a rival venture capital firm, a notoriously predatory company run by a man named Marcus Thorne. They were planning to oust Thea as CEO, using the embezzled funds to buy out her majority shares. Thea felt the room spin, the air sucked from her lungs. This was a betrayal so profound, so personal, it made Sophia's actions seem almost benign in comparison. Sophia had been a selfish, cruel man. But Chloe was her sister, her blood, the one person in the world she had thought she could trust implicitly. "Why?" The word was a raw, ragged whisper. Isabella's expression softened with a pained sympathy. "I did some digging into Marcus Thorne. He and Chloe, they have a history. They were involved years ago before she met her ex-husband. It seems he's been manipulating her, preying on some old resentment she has towards you." Resentment. Thea's mind reeled. She had always been the golden child, the brilliant one. Chloe had lived in her shadow, a fact that had always pained Thea. She had tried to make up for it, to support Chloe, to champion her. But it seemed a deep, festering jealousy had taken root, a poison that had now turned her sister against her. The pieces clicked into place. Chloe's ambition, her coldness, her single-minded focus on the bottom line. It hadn't been about building Athena's Ascent. It had been about taking it, about proving once and for all that she was just as smart, just as capable, just as ruthless as her brilliant younger sister. The pain was a physical thing, a crushing weight on her chest. She had survived her husband's betrayal, had risen from the ashes, had built an empire. But this felt like a mortal wound. How could she fight her own sister? How could she expose her ruin, send her to prison? But as she looked down at her swollen belly, at the life that was so close to entering the world, a new kind of resolve hardened within her. She was not just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her daughter's future, for the legacy she wanted to leave behind. And that legacy would not be one of betrayal and deceit. "What do we do?" Thea asked, her voice no longer a whisper, but a cold, hard statement of intent. Isabella's predatory glint returned to her eyes. "We fight back," she said, "and we make sure that when the dust settles, you are the only one left standing." The battle for Athena's ascent was about to begin, and this time it was personal. The days that followed were a masterclass in strategic warfare, orchestrated by the brilliant and ruthless Isabella Rossi. Thea, her heart a leaden weight in her chest, had to compartmentalize her pain, transforming her grief into a cold, calculated fury. This was no longer a family squabble. It was a corporate coup, and she had to act like the CEO she was. Their first move was to quietly freeze the accounts Chloe had access to, cutting off her supply line. They did it under the guise of a system-wide security upgrade, a move so subtle that Chloe wouldn't suspect a thing until it was too late. Next, Isabella leveraged her network of contacts in the tech and finance worlds. She began to subtly leak information about Marcus Thorne's predatory practices, his history of hostile takeovers, and his reputation for gutting companies for a quick profit. The narrative she was weaving was a powerful one. Marcus Thorne was a vulture, and Athena's ascent, a beacon of female empowerment, was his next target. Thea, meanwhile, had her own role to play. She had to maintain the illusion of normalcy, to pretend that she was oblivious to her sister's treachery. It was the hardest thing she had ever had to do. Every meeting with Chloe was a performance, every forced smile a betrayal of her own heart. The climax of their counter-offensive was planned for the annual shareholder meeting a week away. It was there that Chloe and Marcus Thorne intended to spring their trap to announce their takeover bid and force Thea out. But they had no idea that Thea and Isabella were setting a trap of their own. In the days leading up to the meeting, Thea worked tirelessly. She met with her loyal investors one by one, not revealing the full extent of Chloe's betrayal, but instead painting a picture of an outside threat, a corporate raider who threatened to destroy everything they had built. She appealed to their sense of loyalty, to their belief in the mission of Athena's ascent. She secured their proxy votes, their unwavering support. Then she did something that felt both terrifying and necessary. She reached out to Sarah Jenkins, the Forbes journalist, who had broken her story. She told her everything, the whole sordid tale of her sister's betrayal. She gave her the evidence, the bank statements, the deal memo. It was a huge risk, but she was banking on Sarah's integrity, on her commitment to the truth. "I'm going to run this story," Sarah had said, her voice a mixture of shock and professional excitement. "But I'll hold it until you give me the signal." The day of the shareholder meeting dawned grey and foreboding. Thea dressed in a custom-made maternity dress of deep crimson. A colour of power and defiance walked into the boardroom with a confidence she did not feel. Chloe was already there, standing next to Marcus Thorne. She looked radiant, triumphant, a woman on the verge of getting everything she had ever wanted. She gave Thea a tight, condescending smile. "Ready for the big day, sis?" Thea met her gaze, her own expression unreadable. "You have no idea." The meeting began as expected, the usual reports, the financial summaries, and then Marcus Thorne stood up to speak. "As many of you know," he began, his voice smooth and reptilian, "I have been in negotiations to acquire a controlling interest in this company. It is my belief that with my firm's resources and expertise, we can take Athena's ascent to the next level." He then proceeded to lay out his plan. A vision that involved mass layoffs, a shift in focus from social impact to pure profit, and the dissolution of the very principles upon which the company had been founded. As he spoke, Thea watched the faces of her investors. They were horrified. This was not the future they had signed up for. And then it was Chloe's turn to speak. She stood up, her voice ringing with a false sincerity. "I know this may come as a shock to some of you," she said, "but I believe that this is the best path forward for the company. I have been working closely with Mr. Thorne to ensure a smooth transition, and I am confident that under his leadership, Athena's ascent will reach its full potential." She looked at Thea, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. "And that is why I am formally announcing my support for his acquisition bid, and why I will be voting my shares in his favor." The room was in an uproar, but before anyone could react, Thea stood up. "Thank you, Chloe," she said, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the chaos. "Thank you for making that so easy." She looked at Isabella, who gave her a slight nod, and then she gave the signal. On the large screen behind the boardroom table where Chloe's spreadsheets had been displayed, just moments before, a new image appeared. It was the headline of Sarah Jenkins's article, which had just gone live, "The Ultimate Betrayal: How the COO of Athena's Ascent Tried to Sell Out Her Sister and Destroy a Feminist Empire." The room fell into a stunned silence. The article, with its damning evidence and shocking revelations, was projected for all to see. The wire transfers, the deal memo, the secret emails between Chloe and Marcus Thorne. It was all there in black and white. Chloe's face went white as a sheet. Marcus Thorne, for the first time, looked flustered, his reptilian composure cracking. And then, one by one, the investors began to speak. They condemned the hostile takeover attempt. They expressed their unwavering support for Thea. And they called for Chloe's immediate resignation. The coup had not just failed. It had imploded in the most public and humiliating way possible. Chloe, her eyes wide with a mixture of hatred and despair, looked at Thea. "I hate you," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "I know." Thea replied, her own voice thick with a sorrow that was almost suffocating. "And that's the tragedy of it all." Chloe turned and fled the room, a pariah in the company she had tried to steal. Marcus Thorne, his reputation in tatters, slunk out behind her, his dreams of conquest reduced to ash. Thea, her legs trembling, sank back into her chair. She had won. She had saved her company. But the victory felt hollow, the price unbearably high. She had lost her sister, the last remaining piece of her family, and as a single tear traced a path down her cheek, she wondered if the wounds of this betrayal would ever truly heal. The fallout from the disastrous shareholder meeting was swift and brutal. Chloe became a pariah, not just in the tech world, but in the wider business community. The Forbes article had gone viral, even more so than the first one, and the story of her betrayal had painted her as a modern-day Lady Macbeth, a cautionary tale of greed and jealousy. Marcus Thorne's firm was hit with a wave of investor withdrawals and a series of lawsuits from other companies he had targeted. His empire, built on a foundation of intimidation and deceit, began to crumble. Thea, on the other hand, was lionized. Her story now, with its dramatic second act, had elevated her to near mythical status. She was the woman who had been betrayed by her husband and her sister, and had emerged from the ashes not just a survivor, but a queen. But the public narrative was a far cry from her private reality. The victory was a bitter one, leaving a taste of ash in her mouth. She had saved her company, but she had lost her family. The sense of aloneness she had felt on the steps of her old home returned with a vengeance, a hollow ache in the center of her chest. In the weeks that followed, she threw herself into her work, a familiar refuge from the emotional turmoil. She restructured the company, promoting from within, creating a culture of trust and transparency that was the antithesis of what Chloe and Marcus Thorne had represented. And then, 2 months before her due date, her water broke. The birth was a whirlwind of controlled chaos, much like her life had been for the past year. But when she held her daughter in her arms for the first time, a tiny perfect creature with a tuft of dark hair and her own determined chin, the world fell away. She named her Hope, holding her daughter. Thea felt a profound shift within her. The anger, the bitterness, the pain that had been her constant companions for so long began to recede, replaced by a fierce, unconditional love that was both terrifying and exhilarating. This tiny, vulnerable human was her future, her legacy, and she would not allow the ghosts of the past to cast a shadow over it. A few days after she brought Hope home from the hospital, a letter arrived. There was no return address, but she recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from Chloe. Her first instinct was to tear it up, to throw it in the fire. But something stayed her hand. With trembling fingers, she opened it. The letter was not an apology, not in the traditional sense. It was a raw, rambling confession, a torrent of words filled with a lifetime of resentment, of feeling second best, of a jealousy so corrosive it had eaten her from the inside out. "You were always the sun, Leah," she wrote, "and I was just a planet trapped in your orbit. I wanted my own light, my own heat. I wanted to be the one people looked at with awe." She wrote of Marcus Thorne, of how he had preyed on her insecurities, whispering poison in her ear, promising her a world where she would finally be the star. She didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't make excuses. She simply laid her broken, twisted heart bare. The last line of the letter was a simple, heartbreaking question. "Is she beautiful?" Thea wept as she read it. She wept for the sister she had lost, for the little girl who had lived in her shadow, for the woman who had been so consumed by darkness that she had tried to extinguish the light in everyone around her. She didn't know if she could ever forgive Chloe, if their relationship could ever be repaired. The wounds were too deep, the betrayal too profound. But as she looked at Hope sleeping peacefully in her crib, she knew that she had to let go of the hate, for her daughter's sake, and for her own. She picked up her phone and sent a single photo to the number Chloe had written at the bottom of the letter. It was a picture of Hope, her tiny hand wrapped around Thea's finger. She didn't write any words. She didn't need to. The picture said it all. A few minutes later, her phone buzzed with a reply. A single word. Yes. It wasn't a resolution. It wasn't a happy ending. But it was a beginning. A tiny, fragile glimmer of hope in the wreckage of their family. Thea took a deep breath, a sense of peace settling over her for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. Her past was a part of her, a story of betrayal and resilience that had forged her into the woman she was today. But it was not her future. Her future was here in her arms, a tiny bundle of pure, unadulterated hope. And as she looked out at the San Francisco skyline, the city that had been the backdrop for so much pain and so much triumph, she knew with a certainty that resonated in her very soul that the best was yet to come. The Queen had found her purpose not just in her empire, but in the quiet, unconditional love of her daughter. And that was a victory greater than any she could have ever imagined. 5 years passed. 5 years of scraped knees, bedtime stories, and the quiet, joyful chaos of motherhood. 5 years of Athena's ascent, growing from a sensational startup into a global powerhouse, a billion-dollar company that had fundamentally changed the landscape for female entrepreneurs. Thea was no longer just a CEO. She was a philanthropist, a mentor, and one of the most respected figures in the tech world. She had built a new life, a good life, a life filled with love and purpose. Hope was a bright, inquisitive child, with her mother's brilliant mind and a compassionate heart that was all her own. They lived in the Pacific Heights house, the one Sophia had kicked her out of, but she had exorcised his ghost long ago, filling the rooms with laughter, with art, with the warmth of a happy home. Of Sophia she heard very little. His career had never recovered. He had drifted into obscurity, a cautionary tale whispered in the boardrooms of Silicon Valley. He had tried once a few years ago to petition for visitation rights, a transparent and pathetic attempt to get his hands on her money. Isabella Rossi had shut him down so fast and so brutally that he had never dared to try again. Her relationship with Chloe remained a fragile, tentative thing. They communicated sporadically through texts and emails. Chloe had moved to a small town in the Midwest, had taken a job as an accountant, and was, by all accounts, living a quiet, unassuming life. The chasm between them was still there, a vast, silent canyon of hurt and betrayal. But the photo of hope had been a bridge, however frail, and they had not yet set fire to it. And then one day, the past came knocking. It arrived in the form of a certified letter from a law firm in Ohio. Thea, assuming it was some business matter, opened it without much thought. But the letter was not about business. It was about Sophia. He was dead. A sudden, massive heart attack at the age of 45. Thea felt a strange, hollow numbness. There was no grief, no satisfaction, just a quiet sense of an ending. A final, definitive closing of a chapter she had thought was long since finished. But there was more. The letter was from the executor of his will, and to her utter astonishment, Sophia had left her something. Not money, not property, but a single, sealed manila envelope. Against Isabella's strenuous objections, Thea had the envelope couriered to her. She opened it in the privacy of her study, her heart beating a slow, steady rhythm of apprehension. Inside was not a letter of apology, not a confession, not any of the things she might have expected. It was a collection of old photographs, of newspaper clippings, of faded handwritten notes. It was the story of a man she had never known. There was Sophia as a young boy, with a wide, hopeful smile, standing next to a proud, beaming father. There were articles about his father, a brilliant but struggling inventor, a man with 1,000 ideas and no business sense. And there were letters, heartbreaking letters from Sophia's mother to her sister, detailing her husband's descent into bitterness and despair as his dreams were crushed one by a world that didn't understand him. And then the final devastating piece of the puzzle. A yellowed newspaper clipping announcing the bankruptcy of his father's company, followed by a short, stark obituary. He had taken his own life, leaving behind a wife and a teenage son who had idolized him. Sophia had been shaped by that tragedy, by the specter of his father's failure. His ruthless ambition, his obsession with success, his fear of emotional instability, it was all a desperate, misguided attempt to avoid the same fate. He had not just been a monster, he had been a man haunted by the ghost of a broken dream. It didn't excuse what he had done. It didn't absolve him of his cruelty. But it changed the narrative. It made him human. And then at the bottom of the envelope there was one last thing. A small, tarnished silver locket. Thea opened it. Inside on one side was a tiny faded photograph of Sophia as a boy with his father. On the other side was a picture she had never seen before. It was a sonogram. Their sonogram. The one she had shown him, her face alight with joy, just weeks before he had thrown her out. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. A tear not of sadness, but of a complex, bittersweet understanding. He had kept it. Through all the bitterness, all the anger, all the hate, he had kept this one small, secret piece of them. That night she did something she hadn't done in 5 years. She called her sister. "Chloe," she said, her voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. "I think it's time we talked." The conversation was long and difficult, a painful exhumation of a shared and separate past. They talked about their father, a man who had loved them, but had never known how to show it. They talked about their mother, whose own unfulfilled ambitions had been projected onto her daughters. They talked about the shadows they had lived in, the roles they had been forced to play. And for the first time, they understood. It was not a complete absolution. The scars remained. But the wounds finally began to heal. A few months later, Chloe came to visit. She was quieter, more subdued. The hard edges of her ambition softened by a newfound humility. She met her niece for the first time, and as she watched Hope play in the garden, her face a mixture of wonder and regret, Thea knew that they had found their way back to each other. The legacy of Athena's ascent was not just in its billion-dollar valuation or its impact on the world of business. It was in the quiet, hard-won wisdom that had come from the ashes of betrayal. It was in the understanding that people are complex, that they are shaped by forces they cannot always control. It was in the power of forgiveness, not for the sake of the forgiven, but for the freedom of the forgiver. And as Thea stood on her porch, watching her daughter and her sister chase butterflies in the late afternoon sun, she felt a profound sense of peace. The storm was over. The Queen had not just reclaimed her kingdom, she had found her way home, and she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that this was the story she would one day tell her daughter. A story not of endings, but of unforeseen and beautiful new beginnings. That's all it took to shatter a perfect life. For 9 months, she lovingly called him Arlo. She felt his every kick, his every hiccup under her heart. Her husband James held her hand, whispering promises of their future with their son Arlo. But in the cold, sterile light of the hospital room, as she held the official birth certificate for the first time, another name stared back at her. A name she didn't choose. A name she didn't know. It was in that silent, soul-crushing moment she realized the man she loved had made the most important decision of their lives without her. This isn't just a story about a name. It's about a lie so profound it could only be answered by the deadbolt click of a changed lock. The late afternoon sun of a crisp Boston autumn spilled across the Persian rug in the nursery, illuminating dust motes, dancing in the air like tiny golden fairies. Olivia traced the hand-painted giraffes on the mural, their long necks stretching towards a soft, cloud-like ceiling. Everything was perfect. Almost. For the past 6 months, this room in their sprawling Chestnut Hill home had been her sanctuary, a place of quiet anticipation, insulated from the subtle but immense pressures that came with marrying into the Sterling family. Her James was different. He was her anchor in the often choppy waters of his family's old money society. He was the one who saw her Olivia Chen, the art gallery curator with a sharp eye and a sharper wit, not just a suitable match for the sterling heir. Their love story felt like a modern fairy tale. He'd walked into her gallery to appraise a piece for his mother, and had been captivated not by the art, but by the passionate way she spoke about it. He was handsome, kind, and to his family's quiet chagrin, utterly besotted with her. Now at 38 weeks pregnant, Olivia felt a nesting instinct so powerful it was a physical force. Every tiny detail of this room was a testament to her love for their unborn son. The crib, a sleek modern design she'd picked out, stood in stark contrast to the heavy ornate furniture that filled the rest of the 6-bedroom mansion. "It has no character," her mother-in-law, Eleanor Sterling, had commented during her last visit, running a dismissive manicured finger over the crib's smooth oak finish. "A baby needs heritage." "Wait." Olivia had just smiled, patting her enormous belly. "He'll have plenty of that, Eleanor. We want him to have a little bit of lightness, too." The name was part of that lightness. Arlo Cole Sterling. Arlo for her late grandfather, a kind, gentle man who taught her how to paint. Cole because she simply loved the sound of it, strong and clear. James had agreed instantly. Arlo Cole Sterling, he'd whispered into her hair just last night. His hands splayed protectively over her stomach, feeling the baby's rhythmic movements. "I can't wait to meet him, Liv. Our son." The memory was so sweet, so vivid, it made her ache. She lowered herself carefully onto the plush rocking chair, the one James had spent an entire Saturday assembling, and let out a contented sigh. Their life was a dream. The brownstone on Beacon Street had been traded for this palatial house when they found out she was pregnant. James's software company was thriving, and her gallery was gaining prestige. They had everything. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, a sliver of unease would prick at her. It was in the way James's tone would shift when his mother called, a subtle deference creeping in. It was in the casual mentions of the family trust and the board meetings he now had to attend. He'd always shielded her from the most suffocating aspects of his lineage. But since the pregnancy, the Sterling name seemed to be closing in a gilded cage, masquerading as a life of privilege. The firstborn son carries the legacy Olivia Eleanor had told her over a tense lunch at the Harvard Club. It is a responsibility James is finally beginning to understand. Olivia had brushed it off. James loved her. James loved their plans for their son. The name was settled. The future was theirs to write. A sharp, low cramp seized her, stealing her breath. She gripped the arms of the rocking chair, her knuckles turning white. Another one followed, stronger this time. Her heart began to pound, a frantic drum, against her ribs. She looked at the hospital bag, packed and waiting by the door. It was time. She called James, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. "It's happening," she breathed. "I'm on my way, Liv. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I love you." As she waited, she walked one last time around the nursery, her hand trailing over the crib, the changing table, the bookshelf filled with stories she couldn't wait to read. "We're going to meet you soon, Arlo," she whispered to her belly. "We're so ready for you." The contraction that hit her as she heard James's car screech into the driveway was so intense it brought her to her knees. This was it. The end of the waiting. The beginning of everything. She had no idea how right she was. The first 24 hours were a blur of primal effort and transcendent joy. The labor was long and arduous, but James was by her side, a steady presence, his hand in hers, his voice a constant stream of encouragement. And then at 4:17 a.m., their son arrived with a lusty cry and a full head of dark hair, just like his father's. When the nurse laid him on her chest, warm and squirming, the world dissolved. Nothing else existed. Not the sterile smell of the hospital room. Not the exhaustion clawing at her bones. Not the subtle tension that had been humming beneath the surface of their lives. There was only the weight of her son, the soft press of his cheek against her skin. "He's perfect, Liv," James whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he kissed her forehead, then the baby's head. "Just perfect, Arlo." She sighed, tears of happiness streaming down her face. "Hi, Arlo." They spent the next day in a blissful bubble. Visitors were kept to a minimum at Olivia's request. Even Eleanor was held at bay, a fact for which Olivia was profoundly grateful. It was just the three of them, a new family learning the rhythms of each other. James was a natural changing diapers, with a surprising lack of squeamishness, and rocking the baby to sleep with a low, rumbling hum. Olivia watched him, her heart so full she thought it might burst. The doubts, the whispers of unease, all felt like a distant dream. This was real. This was their life. On the second day, a perky administrative nurse bustled in, clipboard in hand. "Good morning. I just have the official paperwork for you to review and sign off on. The birth certificate information and Social Security application." "Of course," Olivia said, carefully, shifting the sleeping baby in her arms. James, who had been dozing in the uncomfortable armchair, stood up. "I can take care of that, honey. You just rest with him." He took the clipboard and leaned against the window, his back to her as he scribbled his signature. It seemed like a small, helpful gesture. A husband taking on the bureaucratic chores while his wife recovered. Olivia smiled, pulling the baby's blanket up to his chin. "All set," James said, handing the clipboard back to the nurse with a charming finkle. "Thank you so much." The nurse beamed at him before turning to Olivia. "And here is your souvenir copy of the birth certificate application. The official one will be mailed in a few weeks. Congratulations again, you two. He's a beautiful baby." She placed a crisp, heavy piece of paper on the bedside table and left. Olivia, feeling a flutter of sentimentality, reached for it. She wanted to see his name in print. Arlo Cole Sterling, the official declaration of his existence. Her fingers brushed the paper, and she lifted it. Her eyes scanned past the hospital name, the date, the weight and length down to the box labeled Name. And there it was, printed in stark black official letters. Arthur James Sterling IV. The name didn't register at first. It was a jumble of letters that made no sense, like a foreign language. She blinked, her sleep-addled brain trying to process the information. Arthur. Where did that come from? Arthur was James's late grandfather, a famously ruthless patriarch who had built the Sterling Empire through hostile takeovers and an iron will. He was a man Eleanor lionized, and James had always spoken of with a complicated mixture of fear and resentment. Her eyes darted back to the paper, willing the letters to rearrange themselves into the name she knew, the name she'd whispered into her belly for months. Arlo Cole Sterling. But they remained stubbornly, cruelly the same. Arthur James Sterling IV. A cold dread, sharp and swift, pierced through her postpartum euphoria. It started in her stomach and spread through her veins, turning her blood to ice. The baby in her arms suddenly felt impossibly heavy. James. Her voice was a small, tight thing, unrecognizable. He was looking at his phone, a faint smile on his face as he typed. He didn't look up. "Yeah, babe, James, what is this?" she asked, her voice gaining a dangerous edge. She held the paper out, her hand trembling so violently the words blurred. He finally looked up, and for a fleeting second, she saw a flash of pure panic in his eyes. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a practiced, placating calm that she suddenly terrifyingly recognized as the sterling face. "Oh, that," he said, walking over. He wouldn't meet her eyes, focusing instead on a spot on the wall behind her. "Liv, we need to talk about that. Talk about it." She repeated the words, feeling like shards of glass in her mouth. The baby stirred, sensing her distress, and let out a soft whimper. "What is there to talk about?" "This is a mistake. A typo. His name is Arlo." "It's not a mistake," James said quietly, finally forcing himself to look at her. His expression was a carefully constructed mask of gentle reason, but his eyes were pleading. "I named him Arthur." The world tilted. The sterile white walls of the hospital room seemed to be closing in on her. The rhythmic beep of the monitor beside her bed was a countdown to a detonation she hadn't seen coming. "You named him Arthur," she whispered, the betrayal so immense, so absolute, it was a physical blow. "You did this. Without me, while I was in labor, you went behind my back and changed our son's name. It was for the best. Olivia. For the family. For his future. His future. What about our future? The one we planned together. The one that included our son Arlo." His phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen lit up. A text from Mother. "Is it done?" "I'm transferring the funds to the new trust now. You've made your grandfather proud." Olivia saw it. Her vision narrowed on the glowing screen. The text message was a confession, a motive, a co-conspirator. This wasn't just James. This was Eleanor. This was a transaction. Her baby, her son, had been a commodity in a deal she knew nothing about. It was my mother, James, started seeing where she was looking. There's a trust, a significant one. It was contingent on the firstborn son being named Arthur. It secures his entire future, Liv. College, a house, anything he ever wants. He had a secure future, she hissed, her voice low and venomous. She was shaking with a rage so profound it scared her. "He had us. That was supposed to be enough. You sold his name. You sold our son's name without telling me. Olivia, please be reasonable." Reasonable. The word was a laugh, sharp and broken. "You lie to me for months. You let me paint Arlo's room. You let me call him by that name. You hold my hand while I'm screaming in pain, all the while knowing you're going to erase a part of me, a part of us on a legal document the second you get the chance. And you want me to be reasonable?" She looked down at the baby in her arms. This beautiful, perfect stranger, now saddled with the legacy of a man he'd never know a name that felt like a brand seared onto his skin. And in that moment, the love for her husband curdled into something cold and hard and unrecognizable. She looked at James, at his handsome, pleading face, and saw not the man she loved, but a stranger wearing his skin, a pawn in his mother's dynastic games. "Get out," she whispered. "Liv, please. Get out." Her voice cracked, but it held a core of steel he had never heard before. "Get out of this room. Now." He hesitated, then saw the look on her face and knew there was no arguing. He backed away slowly, his hands held up in a gesture of surrender, and slipped out the door, closing it softly behind him. Olivia was left alone in the silent room with the beep of the monitor, the weight of her son, and the crushing weight of the lie. She looked from the baby's innocent face to the birth certificate. Arthur James Sterling IV. It was a declaration of war, and she had no intention of losing. The ride home from the hospital was a study in suffocating silence. The brand-new top-of-the-line car seat sat in the back of their Range Rover, a throne for a tiny prince whose very identity was a battleground. Olivia sat in the back with the baby, her body angled away from James, creating a physical barrier that mirrored the chasm that had opened between them. James tried sporadically to breach the silence. "The house is all ready for him," he said, his eyes finding hers in the rear-view mirror. Mrs. Gable stocked the fridge. Olivia stared out the window, watching the familiar scenery of Chestnut Hill slide by. The stately brick homes, the manicured lawns, the ancient, sprawling oaks. It all looked different now, alien. The beautiful facade of their life had been ripped away, and all she could see was the ugly, rotting framework beneath. "Liv, I know you're angry." He tried again. His voice strained. "But when you think about what this means for him, for his future—" "Stop talking about his future," she said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "You forfeited the right to do that when you made a unilateral decision about his present." He flinched, as if struck. The rest of the drive passed in silence. When they pulled into the long, sweeping driveway of their home, Olivia's heart, which she thought couldn't sink any lower, dropped. There, parked near the grand entrance, was Eleanor's black Mercedes, her driver standing stoically by the door. "What is she doing here?" Olivia demanded, her exhaustion warring with a fresh surge of adrenaline. She wanted to be here to welcome her grandson home. "James," said his voice, taking on that familiar, deferential tone. "The first Arthur in 2 generations. It's a big day for her." Her grandson, Olivia, repeated the words, tasting like poison. She looked down at the sleeping baby. She bought and paid for this moment, didn't she? Well, I hope she enjoys it. Without waiting for James to open her door, she got out, unbuckled to the car seat with practiced numb efficiency, and carried her son towards the house, her sanctuary, that now felt like enemy territory. Eleanor was waiting just inside the marble foyer, dressed in a Chanel tweed suit, her face a perfect mask of benevolent matriarchy. "Olivia, darling," she cooed, gliding forward, her arms outstretched. "Let me see him. Let me see my little Arthur." Olivia instinctively tightened her grip on the car seat, taking a step back. "He's sleeping. Eleanor." "Oh, a little peek won't hurt," she insisted, her smile not quite reaching her cold, assessing eyes. She peered into the carrier. "Oh, James, he has the sterling chin. Arthur will be so proud." She spoke of her late husband as if he were in the next room. The sight of this woman, the architect of her betrayal, gloating in her foyer, was more than Olivia could bear. She felt a wave of dizziness, the postpartum hormones, sleep deprivation, and white-hot rage churning into a toxic cocktail. "I need to take him upstairs," Olivia said, pushing past her and James. "He needs to be fed." She fled up the grand, curving staircase, her footsteps muffled by the thick runner. She could hear their voices below, James's low and placating, Eleanor's crisp and commanding. She didn't want to hear them. She locked the door to the master bedroom suite, a click that echoed the shutting down of her own heart, and finally allowed herself to break. She laid the baby in his bassinet beside the bed and sank to the floor, silent sobs racking her body. She cried for the loss of her son Arlo. She cried for the loss of her husband, the man she thought she knew, and she cried for her own naivety, for believing their love could conquer the gravitational pull of the sterling name and its fortune. Hours passed. She fed the baby, she changed him. She held him close, whispering the name she'd chosen for him, over and over again, a desperate incantation. Arlo. Your name is Arlo. Late in the evening, a soft knock came at the door. Liv. It's me. My mother's gone. Olivia didn't move. Liv, please open the door. We can't go on like this. Let me in. Let's talk. There's nothing to talk about. James, she called out, her voice raw. Of course there is. This is our home. You can't just lock me out. It stopped feeling like my home the moment I saw that birth certificate, she replied. She heard him sigh in frustration. Fine. Be like this. I'm going out for a bit to let you cool down. I'll be back later. We will talk about this, Olivia. She listened to his footsteps retreating down the hall, the heavy front door opening and closing. To let you cool down. The condescension in his tone was the final straw. He still didn't get it. He thought this was a tantrum, a hormonal fit. He didn't understand that he had fundamentally broken the trust that was the bedrock of their marriage. He thought he could wait her out. She stood up, her movements stiff but resolute. A cold, clear purpose settled over her. He wanted to wait for her to cool down. He was going to be waiting a very long time. She picked up her phone, the same phone that had received his loving texts just days ago. She opened a web browser and typed 24/7 Locksmith Chestnut Hill. The first result had a glowing green button, Emergency Service. She pressed it. A man with a kind, weary voice answered on the second ring. Harrison Lock and Key. Bill speaking. Hello. Olivia said, her voice steady and clear. I need someone to come and change the locks on my house. All of them, as soon as possible. Is this an emergency, Mom? A domestic situation? Olivia looked at the sleeping baby, at the opulent room that felt like a prison. She thought of James's casual betrayal and Eleanor's triumphant smile. Yes, she said, a strange sense of calm washing over her. Yes, it is. I can have a technician there in 45 minutes. Thank you, Olivia said. I'll be waiting. She hung up the phone. She went to the nursery, their nursery, and looked at the name Arlo, spelled out in soft blue wooden blocks on a shelf. With deliberate, precise movements, she took them down. She then walked through the house, a ghost in her own life, gathering every trace of the future that had been stolen. The little onesie that said, Future Artist. A nod to her profession. The silver cup engraved with the letter D from her own parents. She packed it all into a box. When the locksmith arrived, a quiet professional man named Kevin, she let him in. He took in the scene, the new mother with haunted eyes, the palatial, silent house, the request to change every single lock, and simply nodded. He didn't ask questions. He just got to work. For the next 2 hours, the house was filled with the sounds of drilling and hammering, the sounds of fortifications being built. With each turn of the screwdriver, each click of a new tumbler falling into place, Olivia felt a layer of her grief and helplessness fall away, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. By 11 p.m., it was done. Kevin handed her a set of new, gleaming brass keys. That's the front backside door and the garage interior door, ma'am. You have the only copies. Thank you, Kevin, she said, transferring a significant sum to him via her phone. "Thank you for your discretion." "Of course. Good night, ma'am." She locked the door behind him, engaging the new unfamiliar deadbolt. The sound was deep, final, and satisfying. She was alone with her son in a fortress of her own making. She was watching the baby monitor from her bed when she saw the headlights of James's Range Rover sweep across the driveway just after midnight. She watched him walk to the front door, a silhouette against the motion-activated floodlights. She saw him put his key in the lock and fail. He tried again, jiggled it. She could imagine the confused frustration on his face. He walked to the side door. The same result. His phone buzzed on the nightstand beside her bed. It was him. She ignored it. It buzzed again and again. Then a text message appeared on the screen. "Liv. What the hell is going on? My key isn't working." Olivia picked up her phone. Her fingers were steady as she typed her reply. "Your key doesn't work because it's not your house anymore, James. You made your choice. You chose your mother and a trust fund over your wife and son. You made a decision about our family without me. So now I'm making one without you. You are not welcome here. Find somewhere else to sleep." She sent the message. Then she turned her phone to silent, rolled over, and faced her son, sleeping peacefully in his bassinet. The war had just begun, but for the first time since seeing that name on the birth certificate, she felt like she had an army. And its first victory was the silence on the other side of the locked door. The silence lasted for precisely 7 minutes. Then the assault began. James's first tactic was pleading. A string of text messages flooded her phone, each more desperate than the last. "Liv, this is insane. It's freezing out here. Let me in. We need to talk this out face to face. You, me. No one else. Please, Olivia, think about the baby. He needs his father. He needs his father." The hypocrisy of that statement was so staggering, it almost made her laugh. She pictured James standing on their perfectly manicured lawn, lit by the tasteful landscape lighting he'd been so proud of, unable to enter his own million-dollar home. The image gave her a grim satisfaction. When the texts went unanswered, the knocking started. Not the polite rap of a visitor, but a hard, insistent pounding that vibrated through the solid oak door. "Olivia, open this door now." The baby stirred in his bassinet, his little face scrunching up. Olivia's resolve hardened. She would not allow him to terrorize them. She picked up the baby, holding him close her body, a shield against the noise. The pounding stopped. A moment of quiet. Then the doorbell began to ring, a frantic, incessant chime. He was leaning on it. A petulant child denied his way. Olivia walked to the upstairs window that overlooked the front entrance, staying hidden behind the heavy damask curtain. She saw him there, his handsome face contorted with fury, his fist still raised from banging on the door. He looked utterly lost. Good. After 5 solid minutes, the chiming stopped. He was pacing now, a caged animal, his phone pressed to his ear. She knew with chilling certainty who he was calling. 20 minutes later, a second pair of headlights sliced through the darkness. The sleek black nose of Eleanor's Mercedes sedan purred to a stop behind James's Range Rover. Eleanor Sterling emerged from the passenger side, not in a tweed suit this time, but in a silk dressing gown and a cashmere wrap, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, even at 1 in the morning. She looked not like a concerned grandmother, but like a queen arriving to quell a peasant uprising. She marched up to her son, her movements sharp and angry. Olivia couldn't hear their words, but she could see the pantomime of the conversation. James gesticulating wildly at the house. Eleanor patting his arm, then turning a gaze of pure venom towards the master bedroom window, as if she could sense Olivia watching. Eleanor took out her own phone. A moment later, Olivia's phone lit up with a call from a number she knew by heart. She let it go to voicemail. A text immediately followed. Eleanor, Olivia. This childish theatrical display is beneath you. It is certainly beneath a Sterling. You will open this door at once and stop this nonsense. Olivia felt a surge of defiance. She typed a reply not to Eleanor but to James. Get your mother off my property. This is between you and me. Her presence here proves my point. You are not a husband or a father. You are a puppet. This conversation is over until she is gone. She watched from the window as James read the text. He showed it to his mother. Eleanor's mouth thinned into a hard white line. She gestured angrily, clearly refusing to leave. James looked from his mother's furious face to the dark, silent house. He looked trapped. He looked weak. Olivia had a sudden, brilliant idea. She went to the smart home control panel on the wall, the one James had installed, that controlled everything from the lights to the sound system to the sprinklers. Her heart pounded as she scrolled through the options. There it was. Irrigation system Zone 1. Front lawn. She pressed the manual start button. On the lawn below, every single sprinkler head erupted with a vengeance, sending powerful jets of cold water arcing across the pristine grass. A direct hit soaked James and Eleanor, who let out an indignant shriek. "What is the meaning of this?" Eleanor screeched, shielding her silk robe as if it were under attack from acid rain. James scrambled away from the spray, looking up at the house in disbelief. Olivia allowed herself a small, bitter smile. If they wanted a theatrical display, she would give them one. The drenched and furious duo retreated to Eleanor's car. For a few minutes they just sat there, the car's interior light illuminating their heated discussion. Finally, the Mercedes backed slowly out of the driveway and disappeared down the street. James's Range Rover remained. He was staying, laying siege. He sent one final text. "Fine, you win for tonight. But this isn't over, Liv, not by a long shot." Olivia watched him get back into his car, recline the driver's seat, and plunge the interior into darkness. She stood at the window for a long time, watching the car that held the man who was now a stranger to her. The siege of Sterling Manor had begun, but the woman inside was no damsel in distress. She was the commander of the fort, and she had just won the first battle. Sleep would not come easily, but as she lay down, the keys to her new kingdom safe on the nightstand, she knew she had done the right thing. The locks were not just on the doors, they were around her heart, and James no longer had the key. The next morning, the Range Rover was gone. A small part of Olivia felt a pang of something not regret, but a hollow echo of the life that had vanished overnight. She quickly quashed it. This was not a time for sentimentality. This was a time for strategy. After a mostly sleepless night, spent feeding the baby and watching the driveway, Olivia knew she couldn't do this alone. The Sterlings had wealth influence and a team of lawyers who could crush people for sport. She had her wits, a newborn son, and a righteous fury that was quickly solidifying into cold, hard resolve. She needed her own army. Her first call was to her parents in California. She told them everything, her voice cracking as she recounted the story of the birth certificate. Their reaction was immediate and unequivocal. "You're flying out here today, honey," her father, a retired architect, said, his voice tight with anger. "Both of you. We'll get you the best family lawyer in the state." No. Dad, Olivia said, surprising herself with her own firmness. I'm not running. This is my home. He abandoned this home, not me. I'm staying here. But I do need a lawyer. The best one in Boston. Her second call was to that lawyer, a woman named Kate Mercer, a notorious shark in the world of high-net-worth divorces, recommended by a friend from the art world who had gone through a similarly messy split. He did what Kate asked after Olivia explained the situation, a note of impressed disbelief in her voice. Changed the name on the birth certificate for a trust fund, Honey. In 20 years of doing this, that's a new one. It's a violation of trust so profound it's almost poetic. We can work with this. The validation in Kate's voice was like a balm. What do I do? Olivia asked. You sit tight and you don't speak to him or his mother. You document everything. Every text, every call, every time he drives by the house. And you start looking. Men like James' families, like the Sterlings. The name on the birth certificate isn't the only secret they're keeping. Look for financial statements, trust documents, anything he might have left behind. Following Kate's advice, Olivia turned her home into an intelligence-gathering headquarters. During the baby's nap times, she began a methodical search of James's home office, a space she'd rarely entered. It was a masculine sanctuary of dark wood leather and the smell of expensive cologne. It was also a treasure trove. Tucked away in a locked drawer of his desk, a lock she pried open with a screwdriver, from the kitchen she found it. A folder labeled Sterling Family Trust, AJS 4. Her hands trembled as she opened it. It was all there in black and white. A subtrust of the main Sterling family fortune, established by Arthur Sterling Sr. decades ago. It stipulated that the firstborn male heir of his grandson James would inherit a staggering sum upwards of $20 million, provided the child was legally named Arthur James Sterling IV. The money would be managed by a trustee until the boy's 25th birthday. The trustee Olivia saw with a jolt of ice in her veins was Eleanor Sterling. The betrayal was deeper than she could have imagined. This wasn't just about securing their son's future. It was about control. Eleanor would hold the purse strings not just for her grandson, but indirectly for James and Olivia as well. They would be beholden to her for any major expense, any significant life choice. The name wasn't just a name, it was a leash. As she dug deeper, she found more. Statements for credit cards in James's name she'd never seen before, with charges for lavish dinners in the financial district, hotel suites, and what looked like rent payments on a luxury apartment in the Seaport district, an apartment she knew nothing about. Who was he meeting? What was he hiding? The perfect husband, the doting father-to-be was a construct, a facade. And she had been living in the stage set he'd built. Just as she was reeling from these discoveries, her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. She almost ignored it, but something told her to answer. "Is this Olivia?" a young woman's voice asked, hesitant and quiet. "Who is this?" It's Chloe, James's sister." Olivia's guard went up immediately. Chloe was the youngest Sterling, a free-spirited artist who had always been kind to her, but was still undeniably a Sterling. "What do you want, Chloe? I heard what happened." Chloe's voice was barely a whisper. "My mother she's on a rampage." "I'm so sorry, Olivia." What James did was unforgivable. Tears pricked Olivia's eyes. It was the first time someone from his side had acknowledged the depth of the betrayal. "He told me you locked him out," Chloe continued. "Good for you. Honestly, why are you calling me Chloe?" Olivia asked, still wary. Because I hate what my family does to people, what my mother does. She did it to my father. She did it to James. And now she's trying to do it to you and your son. There's something you need to know. The Arthur Trust. It's not just about the money. Olivia sat down, clutching the phone. What do you mean? My grandfather. Arthur was a monster, Chloe said, her voice shaking slightly. A controlling, abusive man. The trust comes with conditions, bylaws. The trustee, my mother, has the power to make decisions about the beneficiary's education, upbringing, even their approved place of residence, if she deems the parents unfit or not acting in the best interests of the Sterling legacy. The room spun. Unfit. It was a weapon. Eleanor could use any misstep, any deviation from her plan to declare Olivia unfit and gain legal influence over her son's life. Changing the locks, filing for divorce, it could all be twisted and used against her. She's already talking to the family lawyers, Olivia Chloe warned. She's trying to paint you as unstable, hysterical, a new mother suffering from postpartum psychosis. She's going to try and take your baby. The threat landed with the force of a physical blow. This was no longer just a marital dispute. It was a war for her child. Why are you telling me this? Olivia whispered. Because James was too weak to stand up to her. But maybe you're not. And because that little boy deserves to be Arlo, not a pawn named Arthur. Check the prenuptial agreement, Olivia, the one she had her lawyers draft. Check the fine print under the family legacy clause. James probably doesn't even know it's in there. The call ended. Olivia's mind raced. The prenup. She'd barely read it at the time, swept up in love and trusting James when he said it was just a formality to protect the family business. She found her copy in their safe. With trembling fingers, she flipped to the clause Chloe had mentioned, and there it was buried in dense legalese, a stipulation that in matters pertaining to the cultural and financial heritage of any children, the decisions of the Sterling Family Trust's appointed trustee would be given significant legal weight. She had signed it. Years ago, she had signed a document that handed Eleanor Sterling the keys to her future child's life. But Chloe's call had given her more than just a warning. It had given her an ally, an inside source, and it had revealed her enemy's playbook. Eleanor expected her to be hysterical, emotional, unstable. Fine. She would be the exact opposite. She would be cold, calculating, and armed with information. She photocopied every document, every statement. She took pictures. She uploaded everything to a secure cloud server and shared it with her lawyer, Kate. The siege might be happening at her front door, but the real war would be fought with paper and secrets. And she was finally ready to fight back. 3 days after changing the locks, Olivia made her move. The house had become her fortress and her war room. Chloe's intel combined with the documents she'd uncovered formed a powerful arsenal. She was no longer just a wounded wife. She was a woman with a strategy. Through her lawyer, Kate Mercer, she arranged a meeting. Not at the house and not at a Sterling-owned office building. She chose a neutral, sterile location, a conference room at a high-end mediation center in downtown Boston. It was a place devoid of history or power dynamics, a blank slate where the truth could be laid bare. She stipulated the terms of the meeting. James was to come alone. No lawyers present in the room, though Kate would be waiting in an adjacent office. No Eleanor. This was a conversation between a husband and a wife, or what was left of them. Olivia arrived first. She chose a seat at the long, polished table that did not face the door, forcing him to walk in and see her already in a position of power. She wore not a mourning wife's attire, but a sharp black pantsuit she'd favored for tough negotiations at the gallery. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. When James walked in, she wanted him to see not the new mother he'd betrayed, but the woman he had underestimated. He entered looking haggard. He hadn't been sleeping. His expensive suit was rumpled, and his eyes were red-rimmed. He looked at her, and his face was a mix of desperation and hope. "Liv," he breathed, starting towards her. "Thank you for doing this." She held up a hand, a gesture that stopped him cold. "Sit down, James." He flinched at her tone, the warmth completely gone, replaced by a chilling calm. He sat opposite her, the expanse of polished mahogany between them, feeling like a mile-wide canyon. "I didn't arrange this meeting to reconcile." She began, her voice steady and measured. "I didn't arrange it to hear more apologies or excuses. I arranged it to present you with your options." She slid a sleek, leather-bound folder across the table towards him. Option A. He opened it. Inside was a petition for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. Attached to it were copies of the credit card statements for his secret apartment printouts of the trust documents and a highlighted copy of the prenup's family legacy clause. "That is a divorce filing," she explained coolly. "In it, I will be petitioning for sole physical and legal custody of our son, citing emotional distress fraud and a conspiracy between you and your mother to coerce me into a binding legal arrangement concerning my child under false pretenses. I will be using the evidence in that folder, your secret apartment, the financial deceit, the predatory nature of the trust your mother controls, to paint a picture of a marital environment built on lies. I will argue that you and your family are not a fit environment for a child. And given your actions, James, I think I'll win." He stared at the papers, his face pale. He looked utterly broken. "Liv, no. Please. I never wanted any of this." "You're right," she agreed, her voice cutting through his plea. "You didn't want any of this. You wanted everything. You wanted the wife and the perfect family, and you wanted Mummy's trust fund. You wanted the applause for being a modern husband while still cashing the check for being a dynastic son. The problem is you can't have both." She let the silence hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. Then she slid a second identical folder across the table. Option B. He looked at her confused before opening the second folder. Inside was a different set of documents. The first was a legal petition to change their son's name from Arthur James Sterling IV to Arlo Cole Sterling. The second was a post-nuptial agreement drafted by Kate that explicitly nullified the family legacy clause of their original prenup. It stated in no uncertain terms that all decisions regarding their child's health education and upbringing would be made jointly by Olivia and James, and by them alone. It also included a financial transparency clause requiring quarterly reviews of all family assets and liabilities to be conducted by a neutral third-party accountant. The third document was a brochure for a renowned marriage and family therapist specializing in intrusive family dynamics. Option B is the only other path forward. Olivia stated, her eyes locking onto his. It is not a path back to where we were. That place doesn't exist anymore. This is a path to something new, and it begins with these non-negotiable terms. She laid them out one by one, like a general issuing commands. First, you will sign the petition to change his name today. We will file it before we leave this building. Our son will be Arlo. He will not be a financial instrument for your mother. Second, You will sign the post-nuptial agreement. You will sever the financial and legal umbilical cord to your mother. The Arthur Trust can rot for all I care. We will live on what we earn. Your company, my gallery. If it means selling the house in Chestnut Hill and moving into a smaller place, so be it. I would rather live in a studio apartment with a man I can trust than in a mansion with a puppet. Third, you will go to your mother. You will tell her that you are your own man, that your wife and son are your primary family now, and that she will have no say in how we raise him. Her access to her grandson will be contingent on her respect for me as his mother and as your wife. And finally, Olivia's voice softened almost imperceptibly. You and I will go to counseling. We will go for a year, and you will fight every single day to earn back a fraction of the trust you shattered. You will have to prove to me that you chose me, not that you were cornered into it. She leaned back in her chair, her part said. She had laid her cards on the table. One folder represented an ending, the other a brutal, difficult, uncertain beginning. The choice was his. James stared at the two folders, his head in his hands. He was silent for a long time. The only sound in the room, his own ragged breathing. He looked up, his eyes filled with tears. She'll disown me, he whispered. The trust, the board seat, everything. She'll cut me off completely. Olivia's face was unreadable. I know, she said. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. This was the price of his betrayal. The cost of redemption. He looked at the divorce papers, at the prospect of losing his son, of having his secrets aired in a bitter court battle. Then he looked at the second folder, at the path to a life that was smaller perhaps in a financial sense, but a life that was his own. A life with a chance, however slim, to rebuild what he had broken. He slowly, deliberately closed the folder containing the divorce papers. He pushed it back across the table to her. Then, with a trembling hand, he picked up a pen, opened the second folder, and signed his name on the line at the bottom of the petition to legally change his son's name to Arlo Cole Sterling. The signature was not a magic wand. It didn't erase the betrayal or instantly mend the chasm between them. It was simply a choice, a first trembling step onto a long and treacherous path. The confrontation with Eleanor was apocalyptic. James, armed with a newfound but fragile spine, met her that evening. Olivia was not there, but Chloe later recounted the story in a hushed phone call. It happened in the grand, suffocating library of the main Sterling estate. Eleanor, expecting a report of Olivia's capitulation, was met instead with her son's declaration of independence. He told her he was changing the baby's name to Arlo. He told her he had signed a post-enup that rendered her family legacy clause impotent. He told her that her control over his family was over. Eleanor, according to Chloe, did not scream. Her fury was a far more terrifying Arctic cold. She told him he was a fool, a disappointment, and that he was throwing away his son's birthright for a woman who was common and manipulative. She informed him he was immediately removed from the family trust's board. His access to the generational wealth was severed. She ended the conversation by telling him that he was no longer her son. James came back to the house that night. Olivia had given him one of the new keys after he signed the papers, a probationary key, and he looked like a man who had survived a plane crash. He was pale, shaken, but for the first time in a long time, he looked free. He didn't try to kiss her or hug her. He simply stood in the foyer of the house that now felt too big, too opulent for them, and said, "It's done." Olivia just nodded. Okay, the weeks that followed were excruciatingly awkward. They were two strangers cohabitating in the ruins of their old life. They spoke in polite, functional sentences. Did the baby sleep? I bought groceries. Our first therapy session is on Thursday. They moved around each other with a painful courtesy, the air thick with unspoken words. They put the Chestnut Hill mansion on the market. It sold quickly to a hedge fund manager who fell in love with its soulless grandeur. The sale felt like an exorcism. They used the proceeds, along with James's now finite personal capital, from his business to buy a modest but beautiful Victorian house in Cambridge, a neighborhood that felt more like Olivia's world than his. It had a small yard, a sun-drenched room that would be her art studio, and a nursery that was a blank canvas. Together, without speaking much, they painted the room a soft, warm grey. Olivia unpacked the box of items she had hidden away. The wooden blocks, spelling DANIEL. The onesie that said Future Artist. The silver cup with the D engraving. Seeing them in this new space, this new home, built on a foundation of brutal honesty, felt like a quiet triumph. Therapy was raw. It was ugly. Olivia laid her betrayal bare, the full scope of her pain and rage. James, stripped of his family's influence and forced to confront the weakness in his own character, had no choice but to listen. He spoke of the lifelong pressure, the crushing weight of his grandfather's name and his mother's expectations. It wasn't an excuse, the therapist was quick to point out, but it was a reason. Understanding it was the first step toward changing it. Slowly, glacially, things began to shift. The change wasn't in grand gestures, but in tiny, observable moments. It was James getting up for every single night, feeding, insisting Olivia rest, telling her, "I need to do this. I need to show up." It was him actively listening to her talk about her day at the gallery, asking questions, his phone nowhere in sight. It was him one afternoon, looking at their son, their beautiful legally named son Arlo, and saying, "He looks like you. He has your eyes. Thank God." The trust was not rebuilt in a day, a month, or even a year. It was painstakingly re-earned brick by brick. The new locks on their Cambridge home were symbolic. They were chosen together. The keys were shared not as a right, but as a privilege. Their life was no longer a millionaire's fairy tale. There were no more galas at the Harvard Club. No more fawning society pages. Eleanor Sterling never spoke to them again. But what they lost in gilded cages, they gained in something far more valuable: authenticity. They were building a smaller, quieter life. But it was a life that was real. It was theirs. One evening about a year later, Olivia was rocking Arlo to sleep in his room. James stood in the doorway watching them. The silence between them was no longer awkward, but comfortable. "I love you, Olivia," he said quietly. "I know I have a long way to go to deserve to say that. But I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you thought I was." Olivia looked at him, at the husband she was getting to know for the second time. The love she felt was different now, less naive, more cautious but deeper in a way. It was a love that had been tested by fire and had, against all odds, survived. "I know you will, James," she said. And for the first time, she truly believed it. What you've just heard is a story of ultimate betrayal, but also one of incredible strength. Olivia's world was shattered by a single signature, a secret deal made by the man she trusted most. But instead of breaking, she fought back. She turned her pain into power, her home into a fortress, and her heartbreak into a battle plan. This story reminds us that trust is the most valuable currency in any relationship, and once broken, it takes more than apologies to rebuild it. It takes action, sacrifice, and the courage to tear everything down to build something real and lasting. What would you have done in Olivia's position? Could you ever forgive a betrayal that deep? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one.